Welcome, everybody. We are finally back. Sweet Home Catoosa, and I'm happy to be here. Got a call, and I was happy to get this call because I know a lot of folks in the county last year. There was a lot of questions that came from our local GOP, which is what? That's our Republican Party. So we all went through a voting season last year, and things were different here in Catoosa County. But I got a phone call from Greg, and I'll let Greg introduce himself. And he's here today. We're going to talk about that because I think a lot of folks have a lot of questions, and who better to get them from than you. So, Greg, thanks for coming.
Well, thanks, Richard. For the record, I was not a member in any official capacity of the Republican Party when this went down, but I was very interested. I personally took a front row seat at all the hearings because I'm officially retired, so I can more or less do what I want.
Really quick to make sure everybody understands. So the leadership of the Republican Party, it went through a convention this year. It went through a caucus and a convention, and part of that happens every 2 years, was electing the leadership. So you are what position?
First vice chair.
First vice chair. So Joanna Hildreth stayed as the chairperson of the local Republican Party, and you replaced somebody, and you're now first chair. So you're right. You weren't here last year when all that was going on. But you weren't part of the party in an official capacity at that time. You came in this year.
And largely because of this issue.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of folks, and like I said, a good conversation today where we can all kind of get a better understanding, because I know there was a lot of questions, and there still are. And here we go. We're going to come into what? An election season next year here in Catoosa County, 2026, and I know there's a lot of questions hanging on that as well. So, so back to you. So what made you want to, after seeing what happened last year, run and participate and be in the leadership of the local Republican Party?
Well, if you followed what was going on, it took a great toll on a lot of those people. They were threatened with hourly exorbitant fines, jail time. I'm not saying threatened, that's probably not the right word. The judge said, do this, or, it's $1,000 an hour for each of you, plus, Anyway, and that was a tremendously stressful thing they went through. And some of them, they finished out their term, but they didn't want to do that anymore, and I certainly understand. It was stressful to me just sitting in the front row watching it. So myself and another guy, Charlie Lamar, we were both front row seats for all this stuff, intently interested in how it was all going to go. And when there was a little turmoil at the top, not turmoil, but just people ready to move on, we decided to step up and see this through to its end, not knowing it was going to happen sooner rather than later. These appeals can take, for as long as they want them to take. We were surprised that the initial order came back the initial opinion of the circuit court came back just a couple months ago, and so that was sooner rather than later, which is good. But so that's why I got involved, and that's why a position opened up. And Charlie's the second vice chair. He and I are pretty much in lockstep. Most of this decided to do this largely together. But because we wanted to see this through to its end, and after that we'll see.
So to take everybody back last year, something happened in Catoosa running for office that had never happened before, and I got caught up in it in the sense that I ran for office for the first time. And what I mean by it never happened before, to my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is typically the qualifying process, which, for folks to understand, like for me to run for office, and I never had run for office before, so I had to learn these things as well. When they say to go qualify, essentially what you go down to do is you go down to the elections office, fill out paperwork with your intent to run, and then in the past, if you were Republican or Democrat, depending on which way you went, the local party here, some of them, and I think the Democratic Party didn't necessarily do interviews and things like that. Basically, they just signed off or didn't really have anything in the way of somebody running. Whereas this time, the Republican Party, and this is where I got in, I had to set up an interview, so I had to reach out to Joanna Hildreth and say, hey, I want to run for District 3 County Commissioner, and I'm a Republican, and that's what I want to run as. And so I was notified to say, hey, we for going through qualifying with our party, we have interviews, which I thought was great. It's a great way for them to get to know me to get to know them. And so I got a time. I came in the last week of qualifying. So for me, I was right there at the tail end. It took me a while to really realize that that's what I wanted to do. Nonetheless, I went and had this interview. And so in the interview, there was 16 folks. So it was all the precinct chairs and the leadership, like yourself, who was in your position before, Joanne and all that. And we met right behind Price Drug and Ringgold in that yellow house, and we sat in a room, and there was 16 people around and a video camera, and we were all asked a series of questions. And it was the same questions for everybody, whether you were Gary Sisk, the sheriff running for re-election on the Republican ticket. Everybody got asked the same 6 questions. And so I went and did that. And I got a call that night from Joanna saying, we're going to qualify you. In other words, we're going to let you run as a Republican, because I had no voting record. Now, all this was going on at the same time. The same day I was going for my interview, they were at the courthouse. For everybody that kind of followed a little bit, because there was folks that the Republican Party didn't want to qualify based off of voting records or things they had done, that the Republican Party said, hey, we don't think this is Republican, for a tax increase that you voted on or other things. And so they said, we're not going to qualify you, which essentially said, we're not going to let you run with a Republican tag by your name. And so those folks had to go through the court system to be able to run. And so that was different for Catoosa County, right? That had never, to my knowledge, happened before, where somebody was told you couldn't run as either a Republican or Democrat by their party leadership.
Was that the first time in Catoosa County that happened? I'm pretty sure, in fact, I'm certain, it was the first time at the county level it's happened in the state of Georgia.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't mean it's unprecedented in the state of Georgia.
Right.
But it's the first time it was attempted at the county level. And that's really kind of the crux of the constitutional issue, which we can get into later. But it was unprecedented at this and every county within the state.
Yeah, so we were ground zero.
Yeah.
So after I got elected, I went down to training we go to in December last year. And when folks would say, hey, where are you from? I'm in Catoosa County. It had spread, right? Because I had folks say, okay, you guys are the county, and then they went into the story.
Yeah. I bet.
So let's touch on that. So there was lawsuits filed. They were allowed to run at the end of the day, but the lawsuits weren't finished. And that's what you were referring to here just a couple of weeks ago, I guess. And you know more about that than me. I'm sure you could speak to that. So we're still not finished with all this in Catoosa County, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yes, that is correct. There's not a bow on it ready to turn it over, but you are rounding third base, in my opinion, on this, because the higher Federal Circuit Court of Appeals has made a statement, and that statement was pretty clear on the intent, which I can speak to a little bit because, again, I'm relatively familiar with it. But what it did was remand it back down to the lower federal court to say, fix it. And they were very clear on how to fix it, but just procedurally, it's got to be remanded back down to the district court in Rome to fix it. So we're waiting on that to happen. But I think it's a slam dunk on what's going to happen, because they made it very clear when they issued their opinion what the solution is.
Yeah, well,
that's obviously an opinion, but it's shared by it's shared by everybody on what I would call our side. We got a lot of good lawyers on our side, and I made some statements, and the party has too, that this was a huge victory, and ultimately I'm convinced it will be. So, but if we need to wait for the I's to get dotted and the T's get crossed, and then we'll wait. But I'm not at all concerned what the outcome's going to be.
Yeah. So. It got pushed back down Judge Ray in Rome. And the reason, why in the heck were they here in Rome, Georgia? Well, all the Superior Court judges up here recused themselves.
Well, not voluntarily, they didn't. Judge Graham told them to.
But they recused themselves, however it happened. So it had to be heard down from Judge Ray, who's in Rome, Georgia. And then he set it aside and didn't make a decision, correct? I mean, basically, he didn't rule. And so that went up to the circuit court for them to say, no, you need to rule on that. You have to rule on this. And that's where we're at right now, is he has to make a ruling. Now, both sides, if you hear from both sides, like you're saying, look, based on the language they gave for him to make his decision, we feel comfortable that he gave them a clear enough direction the way we feel.
Sure.
The other side is saying, well, you can interpret that way, but at the end of the day, until he says what he says, we don't know how he's going to rule. And the other side is saying there's precedent to say that, no, he's not going to rule in favor of what the GOP is doing. He's going to. So everybody's got an opinion right now. And until Judge Ray actually rules, we don't know. Because both sides are both saying, we feel good about what the 11th Circuit said, and this side is saying, but we feel good about the argument that was presented to Judge Ray in the first place. So that's kind of where we're at, though, right?
Sure, but I would say I can give you the reasons why I feel really good about what Judge Ray is going to do, and I'm really curious what the other side thinks is a really good reason for it not to go that way. Because, again, the language and what the 11th Circuit Court said looks pretty clear to me. And I can quote you the relevant parts. I've already highlighted it. But back to when I said earlier, this is not unprecedented in the state. It's not. You're old enough to remember David Duke.
Sure, on the presidential side.
That's right. And to cut to the kind of last page of all this rhetoric and the legal opinion is, the Republican Party at the state level in Georgia for the presidential election decided, no, we don't want to endorse David Duke, so we're not going to. And David Duke didn't like that, so he did the same thing and tried to sue, and it was upheld in the same court, the 11th Circuit, that the state Republican Party doesn't have to do that because it's a First Amendment right of association thing. And the relevant part in this is it sounded like they faulted Judge Ray in Rome, saying, look, yeah, there was no specific documentation in state law that says the county can do this, but they don't need that because the U.S. Constitution says they can do this because freedom of association under the First Amendment isn't limited to state government, nor does the state government award that to local government. It's a constitutional thing, so we're on the high ground here. This is the way it is. It's the way it was back in the Duke case, so I don't understand why we're still talking about this. So that's why I think when it goes back down to Judge Ray, and I don't know where that process is and how long it takes to get there. But it's extremely clear that, we set the precedent. It's based on federal law. And even though the state didn't specifically say you could do it, the federal law says, yeah, you can. So go fix it.
For me, and I've said this all along, I've said the voters ultimately decide every election, right? And that is true. Every election is decided by the voters. And what a lot of folks, and I've said this too, right, is put everybody on the ballot and let the voters decide. But I understand the party's position that we don't want somebody running as a Republican, or the Democrats don't want somebody running as a Democrat that don't endorse what our party believes in. Now, I get that. I totally get that.
Well, when you qualified, if you remember,
I do.
There was a thing you signed, and it said, this is the Republican Party platform for the state of Georgia. But bullet points, all these things.
Correct.
You signed it, said, yep, this is my gig. I believe in all this stuff. And so there should be no doubt what the expectations are, because it was a notarized document with money was exchanged ahead, and that looks and smells like a contract. So
sure, well, and it was an oath, right? I took an oath to uphold the Republican Party platform,
which
right?
I'm also sure includes the Constitution of the United States, which is what this is ultimately based on.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I get that, right? And it was easy for me because I read through all that, and I'm like, yeah, that's easy for me. I don't want to raise taxes, and I don't want to take away anybody's rights, and all these things that we listed through. So I get that. But at the end of the day, I think what the voters, and this is my whole thing, I think the party has an obligation to vet candidates. If, like me, they didn't know me. I didn't know them, right? I've always voted Republican. I've always considered myself Republican, but I've never signed a document or an oath saying I'm a Republican.
No, because you never ran for office.
Correct. But that's who I am, and so I identify as a Republican based off of who I've always voted for and the values of the party. And that's where the voters come in and saying, well, let us decide who's the most Republican or who has, because look at the presidential side. When we went last year for our presidential preference, it was a list a mile long, right? Mm-hmm. And it was up for us to decide who we thought was the best Republican candidate to represent the party. which it ended up being Donald Trump, but not everybody voted for Donald Trump. They could have voted for Nikki Haley, or they could have voted for anybody else on there, but the voters decided, right? And that's kind of where I was at is, here's my thing, and this is kind of where I was at on this whole thing all the way. I think the parties have an obligation to educate the voters, right? Like in my case, and I could take my case as an example. Nobody knew who I was. And so I'm trying to educate on everybody and who I am. But I think the party, in my opinion, could do a great job of helping in that process. For instance, we went to that interview I told you about when we qualified. Well, that should be put out, I think, for the public to see, right? In my opinion, that's one more tool that I'm not manipulating, or it's not an ad I'm crafting where I can craft it the way I want to. This was an honest interview with the Republican Party leadership asking me questions. And for folks to see that, then I think they get educated like the Republican Party leadership on who I am. And then he goes a step further for me, I think, based off of now I'm an elected official. So now you can ask me specific questions based on my voting record, right? Whereas I had no voting record, and that's the reason I got qualified, is I didn't have anything hanging over me where they felt you violated that oath that you signed because you went against the party platform. So I think questions could be asked based off of somebody who has no voting record, like myself, to get a little more information. And then more questions could be asked of elected officials who have a voting record. Why did you vote to raise taxes in 2022 if I had been in office? And then I'd have a chance to answer that. The party gets that answer. The public gets that answer. I think the party can do a great job of educating the people, but the people ultimately get to make the decision. But the way it's structured now, if we roll back to last year, you would have had Chairman Black, Vanita Hollander, who I ran against in District 3, Jeff Long in District 1, and Stephen Henry, who was running for chair against Larry Black. Those four individuals, they wouldn't have appeared. I mean, if we get this ruling for Judge Ray the way you say you think it'll go, and the party, based off of what the 11th Circuit said, they wouldn't have been able to be on the Republican ballot. So the voters ultimately wouldn't get to decide on that. And that's the push a lot of people have, is like, we feel like, you know, a smaller group of people are making a decision for the greater group. And that's been the argument, right?
Sure. But I'll tell you, that smaller group of people are elected officials within the party.
They are.
By Republicans who are active in it. And the general public is not as active in it. Everybody thinks they know what a Republican is. But I guess when you said it is important for the party to vet candidates, what do you think vetting means? I mean, if the Republican voters, which are a majority in this county, right, think they're going to get a Republican just because there's an R on the ballot, somebody needs to kind of make sure that that's what they're going to get. And we see that as our job. And because who else is in a better position to do it?
And I get that. I have got educated through the process as well. So what you speak to is these folks, these 16, for instance, were voted on. And anybody who's a Republican in Catoosa County could come and vote for those folks.
Or run for one of those precinct chairs on their own.
Or run.
That's correct.
So we both went through this time, my first time, right? Went through the caucus, went through the convention. There were, I think it was a little less, it was like 287 people at the caucus that showed up for all the precincts in Catoosa County.
Record number, by the way.
Record number, and that's a good point to bring up. And then at the convention, there was, I think, a few less. But safe to say, so there was less than 300 people showed up to decide the leadership of the party. And the leadership of the party, the way they're trying to do, are those elected folks that are saying, here's who we want to approve or disapprove that are Republican based off of things with our party. And I think that's where some people get, it's like, wait a minute. So 300, less than 300, voted for all the leadership. The leadership ended up being that 16 is the one who makes a decision for 40,000 plus folks that are registered voters in Catoosa County to go out and vote on somebody. And that's the disconnect for me. 45,000 voters and figure 75-25 Republican Democrat.
Ish.
ish. So 28 to 30,000 people are Republican out of that voting block, and 1% showed up to participate in the process of electing the leadership of the party. That is a huge disconnect, right?
Well, sure. I mean, that number looks pretty one-sided, but I don't know how unusual that is in any precinct at any local level anywhere in the United States. It is not unique to here. Voter participation, particularly in local elections, isn't that great. You will see a smaller turnout in 2 years than you did during a presidential, just because that's the big ticket item that gets everybody out to vote. That number will be half what it is historically during a presidential year. Always has been.
It is.
And by the way, if you really want to see what happens with local stuff, that off-cycle election we had for the Public Service Commission, you know what a dismal turnout that was countywide? It's a low four-digit number. It's tiny. Why? Because it doesn't get the press. I mean,
no, it doesn't.
And there's not a lot of local outlets here for you to really get what we're talking about. That's one of the reasons it's a good podcast. I don't know how much your viewership is, but anybody that watches this every week is going to get a little smarter on local issues. So I hope it spreads, and I hope it spreads like wildfire. But up until recently, and granted, just because they're seeing something on social media doesn't mean anybody gets any smarter.
No.
Okay, at all. But, and that goes on both sides too. I'm not picking on any one party, but so sure, I'm all about people getting better educated because I think it helps. That method is not really easy to do. I don't know what the venues are. I don't know how successful they are. But I mean, it's the political parties are private organizations. All right, okay. They're private membership-based organizations. It makes them very little different in that regard from the Shriners or the Masons or anything else, okay? People want to become members of these organizations, and they follow certain rules, and they sign certain documents, and they pay certain membership dues to do that. Well, the government cannot tell somebody, provided you're not violating some federal civil rights law, that you have to accept this guy as a Shriner or a Mason. If they don't believe and do this thing you want, well, they can't do that to the Republican Party either. And the board of directors, or whatever they're called, and the Shriners and the Masons, or the Battlefield Golf and Country Club, whoever those people are that determine who their members are, who their like-minded people are, get to make that decision. It's not open for public debate. You don't like it, get on the board, join up, sign up. I mean, so I would say if people are upset that 1% of the registered voters are making a decision for them, then make that number bigger than 1%.
No, and I get that. So last year in the primary that I ran in, local elections, right? Yeah. That's all primary is local, 17% turnout out of registered voters. Flash forward, yep. Go to November when everybody went to the ballot to vote for president.
Right.
It was 75 or 6% of the registered voters in Catoosa County. Right. Record turnout, by the way,
yep.
Right?
Yep.
So when you have record turnout, so people are more interested in what goes on the national level. The problem is their daily lives are more impacted by what happens here on the local level.
Well,
property taxes,
sure,
roads, all these things that we deal with every day, that's what they deal with. But folks don't pay attention to that. But if you turn on the 6 o'clock news tonight, how many news cycle pieces are going to be about Catoosa County? Unless there was some drug bust of a large magnitude or a huge fire or a huge large loss of life or anything, you're not going to hear anything, right? We don't get any coverage, even though we make up a large block of folks down here. We don't. And that's the reason I started this, is try to get information out. But it all goes back to folks felt like, hey, we didn't understand, but wait a minute, you're not going to let certain people run as a Republican, and these people are elected and serving in office as a Republican now, but now you're saying they can't. How did that happen? Well, like me, I didn't know the process.
Well, that's right. And by that qualification process you're talking about, that's mandated by the state. Now, I don't think they necessarily tell each party how they do it, but they got to go through a process. And if you want to, if another party wants to rubber stamp it and just hand it out like candy, then okay, they can do that. That's their decision. I don't advise it, but and to tell you the truth, I really don't know what they do. But I ran against Stephen Henry in 2020, so I know what the process looked like. And one of the first dominoes that started this for me was I remember, because I mean, let's just face it, around here we all know that the winner of the Republican primary on local issues is the winner of the general. It is a foregone conclusion. It would take a long time of very drastic things for that to switch back over, and I don't see it happening anytime soon. So, getting that R beside your name is a big deal.
Sure.
If you don't get it, you might as well not be participating in local politics. So I, like many others, believe that there was a push for people, whether they really thought it or not, whether they really believed it or not, to want that R, and they'll go in and pencil whip the document, sign what they're going to sign, because it never had any teeth until somebody had the gumption to test the system based on the constitutionality of it. It was unenforceable. Well, that happened last year.
And
it was a huge leap of courage and faith for the people whose neck was on the line. So, as it turns out, we all thought, and had our legal team thought, that we were on the constitutional high ground based on all the precedent, to include the one in Georgia, which is pretty clear. We didn't even have to go to another state to figure it out, that this is the way this is going to play out. You just had to go through the painful process to get there, and it was painful. But here we are. It will be settled one way or the other here relatively soon. Like I said, there's no fire lit on it as far as I know, and these courts get around to stuff when they get around to it. But it will happen, and that decision will be final. So we've been patient enough to wait this long. We'll wait however much longer it takes. But again, I think it is a legal slam dunk based on the language the 11th Circuit Court said. So I don't know if I drifted off what you actually asked.
No, but you said something that really struck a chord there. You said whoever wins as a Republican in the primary is pretty much going to walk it in.
Well, that's right. And so I remember again, that's where I was. In 2020, I asked the local Republican Party, I said, when are you going to come out with an endorsement? And the answer was at the time, well, we can't really endorse anybody since you're all kind of Republicans, and but we can support you in the general. And I said, well, I don't need that. I don't need support in the general. Thanks, but great,
Right.
And I'm probably not the only one that did it, but I kind of rode the leadership pretty hard about that. And I said, if you do not have the ability to actually vet a candidate, no kidding, and particularly one that you've got a history on. I mean, you come off the street like you did or I did the first time, there's not a lot of check and balance I can see about what your opinions officially are, because you didn't vote for them publicly and we don't know about them. But that's the beauty and burden of being an incumbent politician. Now, your laundry's out there, and either it's clean or it's dirty, or it's some mixture of both. So now we know. We don't have to guess anymore. And so that's the yardstick that they used, and that yardstick they used was based on voting history as it contradicted the platform that they signed when they ran in the first place. So I never thought that would happen, but it did, and I'm glad it did. And it was a painful thing that's still ongoing. But like I said, I consider this the rounding third base on the way to home phase of this. But
here's what the other folks say. So going back, if whoever wins the Republican nomination, or they come out the Republican out of the primary, they're going to win the general, even if there's a Democratic challenger, because we're so heavy Democrat versus Republican. It's 75 Republican, 25 Democrat. No, those can vary on races, but typically if you wash them all together, that's about what it is. So what people are saying is, if the local party picks who they see as the Republican,
vets, but okay,
they're vets, but they say, hey, this is who. So let's just say 4 people come, and 4 people want to be Republican for District 3 County Commissioner. Mm-hmm. I'm one of those. But they say, hey, Richard, you voted X, Y, and Z, and that kind of goes against the party platform. We're not going to let you run as Republican next time. These 2 candidates over here, we're going to vet, and maybe one of them we flush out and think we're really, there's some things there that, you ran as a Democrat before, or whatever it is. So out of the 4, the incumbent and another one gets flushed out. We're only going to put these 2 on the Republican ballot, okay, in the primary. So what people are saying is those 16 people, essentially, are almost choosing who that goes through. And so the rub is, now, once you're in office, do you feel the pressure to basically be told by that group, hey, here's how we think you should vote, because we put you through, and this is what we feel. So that's the tug, right? Is all of a sudden now those people going to have a strong arm on that candidate once they get in office to shape policy for Catoosa County, and that worries people.
Well, I would counter the term strong arm by following the oath that you signed when you qualified. Okay?
I get it.
Now, that never had any teeth. It was unenforceable. There was no way prior to this to challenge the system, to say that, yep, I know what I signed, and I'm going to do what I want anyway, which is in some cases exactly what happened, because there was no check and balance to make it any otherwise. Well, now there is. I consider that progress. Now, anybody that doesn't like that wasn't paying attention.
Sure.
To the degree that the people who cared about that were paying attention.
Now, I'm not saying the current leadership would be that way, but I'm saying absolute power corrupts absolute at some point. And so what they're worried is through time, somebody else gets into the leadership position and they want to manipulate things. There's an opportunity to do that, right? If I'm the chairman of the Republican Party, and this goes through, like you said, and the courts back up what the Republican Party wants to do, where they say, hey, you do have the right, if you don't want to put them on the party ticket, then that's your decision, because, like you said, hey, we've got the freedom to do that, right?
And the gatekeeper for the brand.
Correct. Okay, so that upholds and that goes true. 10 years from now, the party leadership has changed a few times or things, and somebody that's not got the best of intentions takes over the party somehow, right? They can corrupt it, right? They can have a control on elected officials in a county where we're Republically dominant, right? So you've got 5 county commissioners, they're all Republican.
On paper.
On paper. Well, but in this case, they would be just on paper, because for 10 years, you guys would have been going through this process saying you can't run if you don't meet our standards. So all of a sudden now that one chairperson, for instance, could be like, here's what I want you to do. Here's your agenda, what I want you to accomplish while you're in office. It's not just how I want you to vote, but here's your agenda that we're going to give you. And if you don't follow that agenda, we're going to snatch that Republican from you next election time, and you'll be hung out to dry. Now, there's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of hypotheticals, but there are people that think that, hey, absolute power like that with a smaller group, if you get one rotten apple in your batch, just like you said, hey, we've got rotten apples in the Republican batch. We've got candidates who are in office that ran as Republican, but they're voting in a way that's not Republican. Mm-hmm. We got a bad apple. But that's where the voters come back and say, yeah, but we're not stupid. We see, and, we go to the poll every 4 years on the county commissioner, and if they didn't produce or they didn't back up what they said, we'll vote them out. Now, I beat an incumbent, right? Mm-hmm. The chairman beat an incumbent. District 2, District 4 both beat incumbents to take their seat. Mm-hmm. The only one that wasn't was District 1. Jeff, that gentleman vacated that to go run for another office, and so Jeff Long ran for that. So out of 5 commissioners currently, 4 of us beat an incumbent. Why? Because obviously the incumbent in there, people saw what they did and they didn't like it. So that's what the people say. We can make this decision. We can see who we have. If you stripped all the D's and the R's away, right? Let's just do that for a second, and we call that nonpartisan, right? Or that's what the city councils of Ringgold and Fort O run. They run school board, nonpartisan, right? So what do people have left to really judge them on? Their voting record. What did you do while you were in office? For me, I said a lot of things when I was running for office. One of them was I was going to communicate with people, and I was going to do things where people would see a lot of me for my 4 years. And I've been trying to hold true on that promise, right? But the voters decide every 4 years on the commissioner, whether you have a D or an R or not. It's like, we like what you're doing or we don't. And so that's what the people are saying is, you guys don't need to do this. We got this. We're the mass. But your rebuttal to that is people don't pay attention. They just blindly vote.
I believe there are a lot of straight party line voters out there, and not just here, everywhere. But I don't know exactly what that number is. But I would counter to say this. If you were an incumbent and very popular and everybody thought you were doing a good job, and we got enough bad apples, because it wouldn't take one, we got enough bad apples in the Republican leadership to kind of manipulate this thing, like this worst case scenario you just had, then run as an incumbent if you're that popular. I mean, run as an independent if you're that unpopular and win anyway. Because if anybody had a realistic shot at doing that, then having that R wouldn't be quite as important as it is today. A lot of people wouldn't have put their personal money into a legal fight to battle it. It means something, and it means the difference between getting elected or not. Now, if a day happens where it's not that big a deal, then the whole landscape of this whole conversation changes.
No, I agree.
But we're living in this one, not the hypothetical that one. But you're right. You know, any situation out there where there's power and influence involved, it's got the ability and perhaps even likelihood to give enough time to get corrupted. But it's not like one person can do it in the Republican Party. Like I said, it took 16. Now, some people are more influential than others, you know, but it's not just a dictatorship where, no, I don't like you, so you're out. And again, I would say I cannot imagine that it would be, here's your agenda, go work on it. It's like, well, here's the platform that you signed that.
Sure.
So don't deviate too far from that on either side. And if you do, because I realize politicians get in tough spots and they got to make decisions that aren't popular, that is reality. I did it in the Pentagon a bunch with budgetary stuff, with a lot more zeros behind the numbers than the county's got. You don't win everything. You never do. But you play along to get along. You get what you can to get done in the greater good interest of moving the ball down the field. And every play's not a touchdown, and it's not going to be. So
yeah, no, yeah, I get all that. I guess, you know, and like I said, I'll reiterate, I'm not saying that the current leadership would do that, but down the road there's an opportunity, and you know, nepotism always comes in. So all of a sudden there's a change in the chair and this, that, and the other, and the chair's got a brother, and he's like, you know, I want my brother to be the commissioner for district such and such. So I'm going to make sure that my brother is the only one that Republicans are going to endorse, and I'll just eliminate all of his competition, because then he's guaranteed, based off of the way things have always gone, he'll win, right? There's always those what ifs. Now, we can go back to that and say, well, yeah, if we had a corrupt chair, then heck, everybody in the county would be screaming. So what would happen every 2 years, the leadership of the Republican Party here in Catoosa County goes up for the caucus and the convention. So instead of like me, I get elected and I just absolutely go crazy and I'm just violating every Republican platform there is. I'm tax increasing everybody and all that. You've got to wait 4 years to get me out. With a local leadership, it's 2, which is great, you know, because there's not that bad person in there for any length of time. It's 4 years, now it's 2. So, I mean, I get all of those things too, but that's just my point. And look, I get it. If you stop the person on the street and ask them who their county commissioner is in this county, a large majority would just glaze over like a donut. They have no idea.
You would be happy to get 1 in 5 with the right answer.
Correct, right? You ask them who the president is or who the governor of Georgia is, and they can whip that one right out. You ask them who their House of Representatives representative is up here, and buddy, they'll whip that one out, good or bad, whether they're Democrat or Republican. They all know it's Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? I mean, that one's just why? Yeah. Because she's always in the news. She's always doing things to keep herself in that news cycle. And so I get that. I've never been one of those that I'm just going to follow controversy to get clicks and likes and all that. I just do the work is kind of my motto, is just do the work, do the right thing. But that's where I kind of go back, you know.
Well, and I'll tell you, this is nothing against him, because I didn't know him really well, but I'll tell you, I can tell you why certain incumbents, even before anything is loose, something bad has to happen on your watch. Okay? I think around here, and this is all small towns and rural-ish counties nationwide, I'm sure it's very similar. You know, with the exception of the tax bill that you get, you're not really aware of what's going on that matters. And the tax bill, sometimes if it's exorbitant, you'll call and you'll complain about it. But very rarely does the needle move much in either direction because of general public involvement with decisions that local politicians made. However, you mentioned the news, right? This was just after I retired from the military and came back here. I remember that Hutchinson debacle, which cost the county a bunch of money. That was under a chairman prior to Stephen Henry. Well, I believe that when that deal went bad and the county got left holding the bag for millions of dollars. That was the albatross around that guy's neck, because whether it had anything to do with a decision you made or not, if you acted in the best interest you had at the time, or you got bad legal advice or whatever it was, it doesn't matter. You're the one in charge of driving the bus, and the bus crashed. So guess who doesn't get to drive the bus anymore? You don't.
Correct.
And so that opens the door. Now, unless a very bad thing like that happens, nobody's aware of it. And the only reason they're aware about that is because the Hutchin thing was in the news. It was on all 3 networks. It got, whole regional coverage around here. So that's how that happens. But that only happens when something bad happens. It's not happening when something good happens.
No, it's like anything else in life. You can do 10 great things and nobody notices. You do one bad thing and everybody notices.
Of course.
Right? And that's the way it is. County government right now, people don't really pay attention. Now, if you get a problem in the road, I'm getting a call. Stormwater issue, my ditch is running out. The water is washing out my backyard. I get a call, right?
Yeah, how many times have you ever gotten a call with an attaboy?
Right. You don't get that, right? You don't get that call saying, hey, I was watching the county commission meeting and thank you for voting on X, Y, or Z. No, you don't get that, right? And then a lot of people just are misinformed about taxes. I get a call, hey, my taxes went up last year. Well, that didn't happen from the county side, didn't happen from the city side. We all know and got educated that was the school board side. And then it just happens this week. I look in there in Whitfield County is having the same issues down there right now. They've got a 20% and a 30% increase for the city of Dalton and the county on their Board of Education side that they're proposing right now. It hasn't been finalized or voted on, but more than likely it's going to get voted on, in my opinion, right? But that's when people get involved, right? Or the big one in Catoosa County last was before taxes was what? Chickens.
Oh.
Chickens, right? I mean, so it takes something like that. You're taking something from me. You're taking a right, or you're taking more of my money. Then people get involved. Then people want to know, who's my county commissioner? It's so-and-so. Well, you voted how? Well, I'm going to make it my mission to vote you out of office next time.
That chicken thing, to me, that was the biggest mountain made out of a molehill that I've ever seen locally. And I don't know if because Stephen Henry didn't actually get voted out. He left to run for our office and didn't do it, so he wanted to come back in. Who knows without the chicken thing if Larry would have won or not? But I mean, again, you're driving the bus.
You are, and I'll say this:
the bus
to
looks
Chairman
like
Henry's credit, I think if Chairman Henry would have been in there, it wouldn't have lingered as long as it did. Because he had experience, right? He had been a chairman long enough where he'd been like, look, we gotta make a decision and get this done. I think changing over leadership at the chairman seat and then having that come up, I think that inexperience played a role in it kind of dragging out. Well, but it got a lot of folks involved in voting.
Sure.
Or, listen, how many people, if you went to a Republican Party meeting right now, what got you to start coming? It's always something just like that. Chickens. Yep. Tax increase. They didn't just wake up one day and say, I've got some time on my hands. I think I want to go hang out somewhere. Oh, hey, look, there's a post on Facebook. I'm going to go to a Republican Party meeting. Well, typically that's not why they start going. It's something that triggers them.
That's right. And that's why I originally ran against Stephen, who, by the way, I got no problem personally. He just did something that really pissed me off. I'm like, you know what? So, we're going to try to do something about that. And again, it was a First Amendment thing. And I've said this before in different forums, since I don't want to sound cliche about it. But, 20 years in the military, I've been a lot of places where where people don't have the rights that we have, and quite honestly, very much take for granted. And it really pissed me off when he was trying to diminish one of them. He didn't care for the public comments that were getting made. He's got a little bit of a thin skin. I think he's getting better at that. So there was an attempt made to have you sign up in advance and have the topic you want to talk about approved. Otherwise, we're not going to let you talk. I said, nah, we're not going to have that. And when that kind of failed, he moved it to the back where it was irrelevant. Like, whatever you want to talk about is after we've taken a vote on it. Well, what's the point of me having an opinion then if you're going to vote on it before I get to say what I want to say? which got moved back, and it stayed there, which is where it ought to be.
It is there. It's back there now. But that's what triggered you, right?
That's
In other words,
correct.
that's what brought you forward.
That's
Hey,
right.
I watched this happen. I didn't agree with it, and then it got even worse, and I really don't agree with it, so I got involved. In
That's
your
right.
case, you ran for office. You ran against the guy.
Yeah.
You didn't just start going to party meetings or hanging out and trying to figure out. You got active and ran.
But the chicken thing, I'm not at every one of the commission meetings. I never have been. I'm not now that I'm in the executive committee of the party, because by and large these things are kind of routine. I mean, it is not in my personal great interest whether you renew the copier contract or not. You're going to renew the copy contract. You got to go through the motion. You got to vote on it because money's involved. No problem. But there are things like the chicken thing, which I mean, I'm a zoned ag. I can do what I want with that. But I have never seen, not before, and I probably won't since, that commissioner room as packed as it was for the chicken thing.
Correct.
Okay, and the one time I went to that thing, I stood up and said, and because again, I don't have a personal dog in the fight because I'm zoned agriculture where I am. But I said, you look around, and I looked right at Larry Black. I said, Chairman Black, there's a lot of people in here, probably a record number if anybody keeps that record. And there's a whole bunch of people here that are all on one side of this, and there's very few of you that are not. So I don't really understand what the real issue is here. I mean, these are a whole bunch of people saying, well, this is a good idea, and there's a handful of you that aren't sure it's a good idea, and I don't know why. And I'm not even sure you know why. And I don't know if your lawyers are making this more complicated than it needs to be, but look around. I mean,
Yeah.
and I don't, to this day, it baffles me why. But that could have been that albatross around Larry's Black that held him back. You know?
Yeah,
I don't know. We'll never
don't
know.
either,
but it definitely didn't help him.
Listen, I ran, and I had my reasons for running. I just felt like who represented me wasn't doing the job I wanted done.
I got it.
And so we all have different reasons we get involved, whether we run for office or whether we just come to the commission meetings or attend Republican Party meetings. So let's wrap this down, because so where do you see the party going? I mean, we know this ruling could or could not come around by the time we go through the next election cycle. We don't know for sure where it's going to be. I mean, is the party looking to make changes, like I'm saying, get more involved to get more information to the general public somehow about all the candidates that are running? That's what I call the vetting process. But for me, it's like, I think information's great out there, because what's the candidate going to do? And we all know what the candidates do. Candidates are going to tell you, and I was real careful about this when I ran. I said, I'm not going to make campaign promises, because those just irritated me. I saw Burt Jones today. I don't know if you saw, came out and said he's running for governor, which is, we all knew that was coming.
Right,
But
right.
in this video he made, come take a ride with me, and he gets in his truck and he's riding down the road. But first thing he says, I'm going to get rid of state income tax. Holy smokes. How many? We had Colton Moore ran and said, I'm going to get rid of that. Mitchell in his first campaign said, I'm going to work to get rid of. That's the hot button topic, right? So what do candidates do? They're going to tell you what you want to hear. And I was real careful when I ran, because I'm like, they're tired of that. Because look, Burt can tell me that. The reality is, in 4 years, if Burt wins and he's going for re-election, it's still going to be a state income tax more than likely, and then he's going to have to figure out what he's going to say to come back and walk that back.
That's not an executive decision the governor can make.
Well, it's got to go through, and all your,
Yeah.
and it's 2/3. You got to have 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate to pass that. So, but putting that aside is, as a candidate, we can say things that we're going to do, right? And that sounds great. But the party, I think, definitely, because I'm going to tell you what you want to hear, I think the party needs to tell us what we need to hear. That's where I'm going with this. The party needs to say, here's your 4 candidates in my race in District 3 that was the incumbent, Jimmy Gray, and myself, 3 of us running for the Republican side. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it would have been like, here's these 3 candidates. We sat down and talked to them. Jimmy is real passionate about this. No tax increases. He ran on that. No tax increases. And he's even to the day saying we need to roll taxes back. Our current commissioner, here's what she's done, and here's how she's voted, and here's things we have a problem with the way she voted specifically, right? Goes against a Republican. And then we got Richard, and here's what he said, and here's what his platform is kind of based on. And get that information out. because I think people want to know about their candidates, but the only information they typically get are from the candidates. And let's be honest, I mean, the candidates are trying to run for office, so a lot of times they end up saying a lot of things to get elected. But they have to answer the bell, right? Because once they get in, if they don't do those things, then we're not all dumb. It's just the way it is. So is the Republican Party looking to make changes next cycle, I guess is where I'm going with all this. Have y'all talked and said, hey, we're looking to do some things that are a little different, or is it going to kind of be the same as it was when I ran last year?
Well, the answer to that question will determine on when this ruling happens officially through Judge Ray and what it says. I don't think the system as we attempted to employ it last year was broken. It was derailed. That is very likely to be overturned, so we'll see. But we haven't talked about the nuts and bolts of it, because right now I don't even know what the machine is going to look like.
Right. Yeah, I know you're waiting on that ruling. And
Well,
I
along with
don't,
everybody else.
Sure, I don't think it's broken. I'm just saying, if I'm sitting there, it's kind of like anything we do in life. You go through it, and then you're like, okay, now let's look back at that, and what could we do to do it a little bit better next time? And then you do it, and you're like, what could we do better the next time?
And let's face it, the first time is always the most controversial, because it was, as we started out this podcast, unprecedented.
Sure.
At not only this county, any county in Georgia. So it's going to raise ire and get attention. And a lot of it was hype specifically to draw attention, both negative and positive, because that's the way these things work, okay? Now that it's been largely decided, although not completely decided, but whatever, right? When this thing's a done deal, then there is no more debate about what is allowed and not allowed, what is legal and not legal, and what the courts say we can do and say we can't do. That part will be over. And as if you recall, when I spoke at the county commission meeting right after this, I led off with a statement that if you find yourself with a strong opinion on an issue and it is counter to the Constitution, then you're probably on the wrong side of the issue. I would reconsider your position. That's exactly how this thing is very likely to play out. Now, you can debate whether people should do it or not, but the answer of whether or not we are allowed to, based on precedent set to include in the state by this same appeals court, starting with the David Duke thing, plus other places nationwide, then the answer is we absolutely have the authority to. Now, I think it's a good thing, because you kind of help make my point. We walk around and we talk to everybody in the county. Hey, who's your commissioner? And you'd be lucky to get 1 in 5 even get it right. Well, if they don't know that answer, how much do you think they know about all the nuances behind who that commissioner is? You don't even know the guy's name, all right? You couldn't tell me a single thing they voted on, right? Because they're willfully not involved. That's why the 1% that are involved are the only people who make the decisions, because they are, and these are volunteer positions, man. Nobody's getting paid to do this. Trust me, even at a minimum wage, it'd be worth, so this is all volunteer stuff. But if everybody in the county votes Republican because that's what they believe they are and that's what they believe they want, then the only people who are informed enough to ensure that, okay, I understand you're not involved that much, got it, that's our job, that's what we'll do for you. And you just got to trust us, because we run for these offices, we do this stuff, and I realize trust is one of those words that everybody hates in politics, but there are people, there are gatekeepers for what Republican is, what the brand is, and who gets it, and they are the people that are by default involved and concerned and want that brand to mean something. So if you show up on election day and say, I'm voting for the Republican, well, you may not even know who that guy is, but you ought to know what he is. And I've got a contract that says what you're supposed to do, and we're the ones watchdogging it to make sure that you are. And if you don't, then people need to know that. Now, this podcast and other things like it, which I hope I'm a semi-regular member on, because I'll talk on anything you want, will help educate that thing like you want, and it's a step in the right direction, and I applaud it. I wish it happened more often.
Well, that's the goal. The goal is to educate folks and all that. So what I'll say for sure is, when the ruling comes back, which it will at some point, I want to have you back for sure then.
Sure.
We can come between them, but I want you to come back and we'll go over the ruling, whichever way it goes. I get the gatekeeper thing. I guess just a lot of folks, and you're right, folks don't pay attention to local stuff as much as they should, unless something gets impeded on them, right, or something. And I get that. But at the end of the day, we just have to figure out a way for the system to work better. And that's what I said. I think that personally, my recommendations are just like we're doing and I'm doing here, trying to get information to folks. I think the Republican Party could do some of these similar things, not just at meetings, but doing a podcast or doing something to talk about local stuff and getting stuff out there. That's the educational piece I would like to see more so than anything. So, look, running out of time. We got to wrap it up. Thanks for coming.
Sure.
Greg Gordy, he's active now and first chair. And you're right. You weren't there last year. You weren't a part of the leadership, but you are now. So listen, I applaud you for coming and talking to us. I think people were interested to know kind of where your thoughts are on this since you're part of the leadership now. And I appreciate you stepping up and doing that. And we'll continue to carry on this conversation because everybody has strong and varying opinions on this topic for sure.
And by the way, on anything else between now and whenever this happens, give me a call or I'll initiate a call. I'm happy to do this as often as you would like, and I will.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I think that's what's great. So thanks for watching, and until next time, have a great week, Catoosa.
Yeah, you and I as one will always be better than